Hi, everybody, and welcome to the School Garden Support Organization-Network webinar series. This is our September webinar, Volunteer Management and Community Support. My name is Tristana Perkle. I lead up all of the outdoor education programs at Whole Kids Foundation. And Whole Kids is super happy and just thrilled to help host these webinar series with the SGSO network. So I see people are joining. We'll go ahead and get started. We've got a wonderful list of panelists for you today, and we want to make sure we leave enough time for questions. So if we could go to the next slide, I will just cover a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, and it will be sent to you in the follow-up email. So if you have to jump off for any reason, you can get a full recording, and it will be available on our website as well. There are a couple of handouts. So in your control panel, if you are on a computer, there is a copy of the presentation and then a handout from one of our presenters, City Blossom. We will be doing some polls throughout the webinar. So if you are on a computer, this might be available if you're on a phone as well. I'm actually not sure, but we're just going to be asking for some interaction from the audience so we can kind of know who you are and kind of help us understand some pieces. So there's about 4 of those throughout the webinar. So just be sure to engage with us, and that pops up on your screen. And then finally, we will be leaving some time for questions at the end. So feel free to, in your control panel, just type in your questions as they come up, and we'll be organizing those and asking them at the end. Great, and now I'm going to pass it over to our first presenter, Sam.
Great, thank you, Tristana. Hello, everybody. My name is Sam Mullery. I'm the School Garden Specialist here in Washington, D.C. at the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, OSSE. And I'm going to kick us off today and talk a little bit about the School Garden Support Organization Network. For those of you that aren't familiar, the School Garden Support Organization Network was established a few years ago out of realizing the need for this type of network to support people that manage and support multiple school gardens, either regionally, statewide, in a city or a school district, or a local county or town. And this didn't previously exist. So we created this network, and it's been growing and growing and growing each year. We have hundreds and hundreds of people that are participating. And the way that people participate is is 3 ways, really. We have an online forum where folks can find access to many different topics. You can see them listed there, from funding to curriculum. And within each of those, there's a long thread of lots of great conversation, questions, topics, suggestions, resources that I encourage folks to check out and share if you have the opportunity. So this is a very active forum. Folks also participate in the way that you're participating right now by attending one of our monthly webinars. And you can see a list of the webinars from this year, both past, present, and future. So please, if one of those topics is interest to you, please visit our website, and you can register for the next webinar, I believe, coming in the next day or 2 in October. And then lastly, people participate through attending gatherings. So here's a list of some of the upcoming opportunities to get together in person, and we have some great conversations, workshops, and as a part of existing conferences like the Farm to Cafeteria Conference, and also as standalone conferences for the SGSO network. So there's more to come on all of that. Please stay tuned. Our network is growing, and we're so happy that you're joining us today. All right, so today we have the pleasure of talking about volunteer management and community support. We have some great panelists today. You're going to hear from each of us. I'm going to talk very briefly, and then I'm going to hand it over to some of my colleagues who have some great advice and resources to share. So myself, Sam Ullery, and we have Willa, Pohlman, and Hillary and Dove Block as well. So you're going to be hearing from each of us, and I really feel like this webinar captures a full breadth of creative and innovative, effective ways to manage volunteers. One thing that you all probably know is that school gardens require maintenance. It's not like a classroom where it doesn't need as much maintenance. And for many of us, for many of you, the school garden it requires more maintenance than one or two people can possibly take on throughout the year. And it goes beyond what the students can do. So today we're going to be talking about how to manage groups of volunteers in order to not just maintain the garden, but I think you'll hear that there's more than just the maintenance piece that adds value to the volunteer structure. So we'll be doing some case studies and then have some time for Q&A. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. I've already introduced myself. Again, I'm with the Office of the State Superintendent of Education here in Washington, D.C. And I'm just really excited to get to share a little bit about a program that we started 2 years ago. But first, I want to give a little background on our program. We really were a state agency, so we work to support across a lot of different program areas around school gardens. Currently, we have about 14,000 students and over 600 teachers that are engaged in school gardens in Washington, D.C., and 134 schools with garden programs. So I'm very privileged to get to support those through multiple different channels. One of the things that we started 2 years ago was a program called Shared Roots. And Shared Roots is it's a partnership between DPR, DC Parks and Recreation, which is a local government agency that oversees the community and urban agriculture programs within the city. And what we found as we were talking was that residents in Washington, D.C. have limited gardening spaces. Some of our community gardens have 2 or 3 year long wait lists. Can you imagine just wanting a community garden plot and having to wait 2 or 3 years before your name came up on the list? At the same time, we have school gardens with lots of space. Our schools have a tremendous amount of property, and these school gardens are underutilized during the summer months. And a lot of our garden coordinators and teachers and staff are looking for ways to maintain those programs. So with these two known things combined, this created a program called Shared Roots. We were able to solve 2 problems simultaneously: the problem of lack of access to garden spaces for district residents and the problem of summer maintenance for our schools. So the Shared Roots program is OSSE's role in this program is really administrative. We don't do the programming. We don't dictate what volunteers do in the garden or what those relationships look like between school gardens and community members. We leave that up to the schools. But what we do is some of the organization and some of the project management around what they do. So we do require that everyone completes a waiver and attend an orientation, and we do require that there's some maintenance happening in the garden where the community member is coming in to the school garden and they're maintaining their plot, if they're given a garden plot for their own personal use to garden over the summer, and they take produce home from that plot. But they also are expected to do some light maintenance of the larger school garden as well, like watering or weeding. So we encourage them to take home produce and share them with their family. So some of the goals, because we have 2 different groups of people that are involved, we have the site coordinators or the school garden coordinators or the school staff that are managing the garden site. They're very interested in maintaining the garden over the summer, increasing the production of the garden and having that garden ready for the start of school for when students come. The members or the volunteers, what they're really interested in is learning how to grow, having access to growing space, and really that community engagement piece. So we really, like I mentioned before, we did the project management for this. We really provided the framework for folks to be able to connect with community members as well as some of the baseline administrative pieces. So we had a process that starts in January and goes through September each year. It's a very typical kind of project management process where, we create a plan, we define the problem, we do outreach, We then have an application that goes out to community members. They can apply. We also have an application that goes out for site coordinators and they can apply. And we do the matchmaking. That's really where the bulk of our work is. We take the applications from the community members and we make them available to the site coordinators for them to identify community members that would be a good fit for their program. And this can mean a lot of different things. That might mean, you know, a particular school garden may only be accessible during the weekend or during certain times of the time, and that might fit into the community member's schedule. We received a lot of feedback in our second year. It varies from, this is a great program, I want to do it again next year, to the garden partially survived, which I think is a pretty great piece of feedback. It's like, we barely, you know, we just kind of survived, which some days I feel like that. But despite all this feedback, it's a growing program. We only, I shouldn't say only, we had 8 school garden sites this year, and I should mention that this also extends to home yards, backyards, front yards, and also community garden sites as well. So it's not just schools. The objective of this program is to connect district residents with growing opportunities. And some of the last thoughts that I thought I'd share with people before I pass it off that might be applicable to what you're doing is really thinking through, and these are the questions that we grapple with as we're creating this program, is, you know, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? Is there a problem? And what is that problem? Let's identify it, and it should be a problem that we all agree on. In this case, the problem was 2, right, that I mentioned earlier: access to growing spaces for community residents and lack of maintenance during the summer months. Also, what's the scope? We can't do everything, so we just decided to focus on the summer. The hope is that community members will want to stay on and the school will be receptive to those community members continuing during the school year. Next, what are some acceptable risks? We created a waiver, but we can't control everything, so we accept those risks as acceptable. And then also, what is the value that brings to this program and who receives the benefits? So I hope that that brief overview is really helpful for folks. I'm happy to chat more about it and discuss more about this program. I am now going to just give 1 second for folks. If they have questions, just take a moment to jot them down or type them in the question bar as we transition and move on to Willa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Willa Pohlman. I'm the Director of Programming and Trainings at City Blossoms. Next. City Blossoms is a nonprofit based in DC. We work with toddlers all the way to teenagers, taking on different projects, but we try to incorporate art, science, community engagement, healthy living skills, and all ages into all of our programming. And through these partnerships and our work, we've done sort of over 100 projects with different schools and community organizations across DC, and as well as supporting other projects around the country. Next. We're going to do a little poll here. How many volunteer days do you have in your garden every year? We'll wait until a few more people have done it. All right, it looks like a lot of people have done over 12 volunteer days in their garden. Great. So we're going to move on to our next bit. City Blossoms has hosted over 300 work days, and we've had lots of successes, but also a lot of bumps over the years. And so the hope is that some of this webinar will touch on some of the things that will maybe make some of your work days go more smoothly, or you might have other things to share out with people. Whether you have huge work days or small regular hours where people come and volunteer, there's a lot of planning and things that can be helpful in making those go more smoothly. Next. We've found that one of the biggest ways to make workdays go smoothly is lots of preparation. So coming up with clear goals and designating roles during workdays can make everything go a lot more smoothly. No matter what, we try to have food and water at all of our workdays so that volunteers can stay happy and healthy during the entire time. We usually never have one of our workdays go over 3 hours because that's a big time commitment, and that way people also have a sense of a clear beginning and which makes it easier for them to participate. And one of the things that we always try to have ahead of time, especially for our larger work days, is a clear event plan, and that is in the handout section of the webinar. And that's just what's worked well for City Blossoms and also our partner schools in making sure that all of the necessary preparations go smoothly. And we're going to talk a little bit about 2 different types of volunteer opportunities, larger scale work days and also some sort of smaller regular volunteer hours. And then just remembering lots of advertising so that you get all of the volunteers you need out to do the many projects you have to take on. Next. Getting ready. We do a lot around prepping for our work days so that the projects that we decide to take on can really get finished by the end of the work day. So whether it's prepping your sign wood so that it's all cut out and sanded and primed so that you can hang your signs at the end of a work day, or it's making sure that your deliveries actually get to you on time. Those can be sort of key in making sure your day goes really smoothly. I can't count the number of times where we thought we had a huge delivery of mulch and soil that we were depending on, and then the company calls you up the day of and says, actually, it's coming to you in 4 days, and then you have to scramble to figure out other jobs. So we often try to get things delivered well ahead of time. And then a few other little things that always trip us up are making sure that drill batteries are charged and that we know what we're doing if suddenly the weather changes and we have a lot of rain and can't paint the giant signs that we are planning on painting. All right, we'll move on to the next slide. Documentation. One of the things that is always really helpful, but we seem to often forget, is to take before pictures. The pictures up on the screen right now are actually pictures from a new build, so there was absolutely nothing in place before this workday started. You just see a giant patch of grass. But it's really nice to be able to show progress over time and after the day so that later on you can follow up with a thank you and really remind volunteers how much work they pulled off. So in this case, they built the first stage of an entire garden. And it's also a really nice way to be able to track the progress of your space over time. So in 5 years, this space can see how this patch of grass turned into their current garden. Next. This is an example schedule of how we tend to break down our work days. Our work days often happen on Saturday mornings when we are able to get lots of parents and neighbors and teachers out to help, as well as students and younger siblings. One thing that's worked really well for us is to have a core group of people who are organizing the day come together and be able to talk through stations before all the volunteers come. And that way, everyone who's leading a station knows what they're supposed to be doing. And the organizers aren't so much doing all of the work as supporting other people and getting their tasks done. And this just helps everything go more smoothly. And so usually we'll have 1 or 2 people for each station. And this is sort of an example of one of the work days that we're planning on hosting in a few weeks. Just so that everyone knows clearly what they're going to do. Everyone has sort of their own area of the space that they're working on. And then the picture below the sort of main organizers gathering is a to-do list. It's a little hard to see because our marker was running out of ink, but having sort of a public public list of what's to happen gives people a clear picture of what they're in for the day. And another thing that works really well is to make sure that people start picking up trash before the workday is done. And that way there aren't 4 people at the end of the day who are picking up all the trash and tools and making sure everything's left nicely, and that you have a little extra help in the less fun tasks of a workday. And then saving time for sort of a group picture and a thank you. All right, next. Oh, and don't forget to put on music at the beginning. Having music always makes everything better. Even the worst tasks are more fun with music. These are a few stations that have helped us sort of figure out ways to manage different projects. Having a separate station and area for construction can keep some of your younger friends who you don't want near the drills safe, and also giving them a job that's really age appropriate. And drills are usually one of the things that we feel really comfortable having at a work day, as long as they're charged. That kind of makes it so that volunteers are getting used to use the tool, but you don't have to worry about someone using a saw and having any major injuries. And then a painting area, again, having a tarp down and thinking through some of the details so that you don't leave like giant paint splotches all over someone's basketball court or something like that. All right, we're going to move on to the next slide. These are a few ideas of some of our favorite art and signage projects. We spend a lot of time putting art and signage in our gardens as a way to have communication all over the garden at all times, even when no staff is there. And these are some fun activities that allow people of all different abilities to jump into making art. And that way, if someone isn't sort of up to lifting heavy things at a work day, there's still a really great way that they can be involved and leave their mark on the space. Next. Thank yous. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm guessing y'all are really good at thank yous, but it makes a huge difference. Taking a picture and having a little snack to share at the end of the day can make a huge difference in people feeling appreciated and wanting to come back and volunteer with you again. So we always like to take a goofy picture, as you'll see below, and sort of a more serious, something you would send your parents kind of picture. All right, next. Lastly, we're going to touch briefly on some ideas for more regular, smaller volunteer hours, which then I'm going to pass this off to Ullery, who's going to go more in depth. These are just some ideas of ways that schools have found are really helpful in keeping their spaces up regularly. We call them open times. They're just consistent hours where the garden is open to everyone, and we do a lot with independent play and garden care, as well as parents having a chance to take some of the produce home. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. If anyone has any questions, take some time to type those into the bar, and I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to Ullery.
Hello, garden friends. I'm Ullery. Next slide. I work at the Capital Area Food Bank, and we're the largest organization working to solve hunger in the DC metro area. So that means we partner with 469 organizations. We help 540,000 people. Last year, we distributed 44 million pounds of food, including 18 million pounds of produce. And we really can't do this on our own. We rely on 30,000 volunteers to make that possible. Next slide. Now, I'm the gardener. So I work in the urban demonstration garden, which is a half-acre organic urban farm attached to the warehouse. I'm trying to connect people to real food, to produce, and show them how to grow it, how to eat it. So the produce that I grow is first used for nutrition education, and if it's not used for that, we put it into the warehouse and it goes out to people who need it. So I'm the only staff member in the garden, and I really rely on about 600 volunteers annually to help the garden grow. Next slide. So who volunteers? I have groups and I have individuals. And with the groups, I have lots of schools and classes, churches, corporate groups, college students, people with special needs, homeschool students, nonprofits. Sam's group from the OSSI comes and volunteers with me every year. I also have individuals. I have a lot of adults who come, seniors, families. I do get some high school students looking for service hours. Next. So for all those people, I want to make sure that everybody has a great experience in the garden. First, I want to make sure that they're safe, right? That they're working within their physical and cognitive abilities. But really, I want to make sure that everybody feels welcome. When they come into the garden, I say, welcome, I'm Hillary. I'm so glad to see you today. I want to make sure that they leave with a sense of accomplishment, that they can look back at the garden and say, God, I did that. I planted those 50 kale plants, right? I want to make sure that they've learned something, and it doesn't matter who you are. Like if you could be a really master gardener, or you could be somebody totally new who doesn't like the garden, you're going to learn something, and it'll be something about vegetables, nutrition, gardening, or the environment. And finally, I just want to make sure everybody has fun. I don't want people to feel isolated. So I often have music going. We sample the tomatoes that are growing. I want to make sure that the volunteers are connecting with each other and that they're leading with a smile. Next. So volunteer profiles, and this is where it gets tricky, right? Because I have all those different types of groups and individuals coming. So some of them are sort of dedicated regular volunteers. We love those folks, right? But we have seasoned gardeners, we have people who come, they might be carpenters, they might be entomologists, they might be coming to the garden looking for a big workout, right? But also have people who are afraid of the garden. They're first time in the garden, they're afraid of the bugs, the dirt, they're really suspicious about vegetables, or maybe they have a bad back or health issues such as diabetes, or maybe they're, for me, the garden is an all-inclusive place. Like I tell people to bring their 1-year-old, and I welcome them. So how do I manage all these different people in this garden? Next. Oh, here it is. Here's a poll. Have you ever had people show up to volunteer who had fundamentally different skills and limitations than you expected? This has happened to me so many times. I've had groups come where I thought that I was getting, the equivalent of the Marine Corps, and it's been the church ladies who I love, but they don't have the same physical stamina. Or maybe recently I thought I had a group of 6th graders showing up, and it turned out that they were 1st graders. It's quite a different thing that you have to figure out. All right, so let's see. I'm not seeing do you see the results? No. Oh. Here we go. So, yes. So it looks like we have a lot of people who've experienced this, and I bet Willa has too. Okay, so almost everybody has experienced this, right? We've 92% of people have had people show up who are like, oh no, how am I gonna use these people, right? What are we gonna do? So we'll go back to our slides. So the way I think about this, especially because unlike City Blossoms and Willa, I don't have like a specific work day. I have work happening every day. So I have several kinds of tasks. I have regular tasks, which is your watering, weeding, your planting. Those are always happening. I have my specialized tasks, such as carpentry or fertilizing. I have these really big physical tasks where I have people who really want to come get a workout. I'm going to have them laying wood chips. But I also have easy tasks, and especially for some of those people who might have a bad back or they're really nervous about the garden. Often I can have them start by just watering or arranging flowers, deadheading the flowers, collecting seeds. Next. All right, and this is where you can really see the innards of my garden organization. If you look at the photo on the left, this is an actual day that I had, I think, last summer, and I can't quite remember who was coming. But you have to match the task to the volunteer, not the volunteer to the task. So when I have people come in, I have to assess, oh, that person's going to do really well with this or that. Oh, I better not, this person is limping, I better not have them kneeling and planting, right? So I'm thinking about that constantly. I keep a running list of what needs to be done in the garden. So if you look on the left, I'll have priority tasks for volunteers. So those are in the red stars. And then I'll also have marked tasks that I'm reserving for an upcoming group. So in this case, they're that Saturday SAT. I also have tasks that are marked for me because I know that I have to be the person who figures that out, such as cutting and painting the signs for the kids' bed that I was doing. And then I've reserved a task for my friend Karen, who's a regular volunteer, and she loves to paint, so I make sure that I have painting tasks set up for her. Last but not least, a lot of times you need extra tasks. So if you have a group come in and they're super gung-ho and they're working almost too fast, I sometimes run out of things to do on the agenda of the day. So I always have extra tasks that are backup plans. So in this case, at the top, I'll have pots, USS, that's Urban Food Studio pots. I'm going to screen them, fertilize them, and refill them. That's a great task if we have the time. Next. Another poll. So have you ever had volunteers standing around not knowing what to do? And here are your answers. You could say, yes, we ran out of work. That's happened, right? Yes, we had too many people show up. That can be a problem. Or yes, they showed up late and didn't listen to the directions. That's frustrating. Or never. It looks like the winner is yes, they showed up late or didn't listen. All right, I think that's a very common experience. All right, so we'll go back to our slide. So planning for volunteer groups. So one of the ways that I think about, managing folks, and this isn't like a specific work day, but in sort of a normal volunteer shift, you really need to change up the activities. No one wants to do the same thing for 3 hours, especially if it's weeding or laying mulch. So often I sort of stack the activities, and this is great for people who are coming late too, because you know that you're not going to be doing the same thing the whole time. So we're going to do the hardest thing first. We're going to end with the easiest task. Oftentimes they end with the most pleasant task, so I try to end with the hardest thing because that's the thing that people are thinking about when they're coming to my garden. They're going to say, oh, maybe I can harvest some lettuce or pick some tomatoes. So I'll end with that. But also I need to be prepared to change it up or add tasks just to keep people busy. So similar to Willa's schedule, I have a sample schedule. For me, I do a welcome introduction, 5 minutes. We might water for 25 minutes. We'll lay wood chips for about 45 minutes. That's about all people can tolerate of that task. We'll chop compost for 30 minutes. We'll weed a flower bed. I try to keep the weeding short. And then we'll harvest peppers, which takes a lot of time. And then we'll clean up and say thank you for the last 15 minutes. Next. So what are the challenges that I see the most? One is dehydration. I'm constantly checking in with volunteers to make sure they're drinking water. People don't necessarily understand their own physical limits, and it's important that I'm aware. Also, the pace of work. I have volunteers who come in and I laugh about this, but I've had some great military volunteer groups, and they're coming for a workout, and they're going as fast as they can. And I have to tell people, this is not a race. Go slowly. Pay attention to the details. Like, be methodical. Take a break. Have some gardens in. I'll tell you, the music really helps with this. Boredom. You know that when volunteers are starting to lose interest, that they've been doing that task for too long. And so often I'll teach them something new and change the task. And finally, inattention. And this is kind of the people aren't listening, so they're doing the wrong stuff. So when volunteers get lost on their phone, and I know everybody's seen that, or they lose themselves in a conversation and they want to talk about what they did last night, right? I gently redirect their attention by handing them a tool. I'll give them a trowel. I'll say, hey, that area over there has some weeds. Can you please take care of that? And so I kind of gently redirect people pretty frequently when it needs to happen. Next. So this is my sort of feeling about it. The garden is about community, right? So if those volunteers feel welcome, if they have a sense of accomplishment, if they learn something, if they have a new friend, they've had fun. And if they've had fun, they'll come back. We love those dedicated returning volunteers. So I want them to come again, and I also want them to donate, right? So I like to convert our volunteers into supporters. So once we've done all these things, the volunteers are really creating community. So think about it as I'm cultivating plants, food, and people, and hopefully making everything a bit better. So that next slide, I'll give you a chance to ask your questions, and we're going to move on to Deb.
Thank you, Hillary. My name is Doug Block. I am the children's educator at the New Orleans Botanical Garden, and I coordinate all of our children's education programs at the garden. Next slide. The New Orleans Botanical Garden was founded in 1936 through funding by the Works Progress Administration, and it's located in City Park, which is a 1,300-acre park in New Orleans and our largest public park. And over the years, we've gone through a lot of different periods of growth and expansion. And we serve as a hub for horticultural education for Louisiana and much of the Gulf South. And our mission is to cultivate, promote, and inspire the knowledge, love, and appreciation of plants through educational programs and exhibits. Next. So our children's education programs that I run at the garden kind of vary in terms of regularly occurring programs, seasonally occurring, some of our one-off public events like our Earth Day celebration that happens every year, or a garden show. And we have a variety of different programs. I'm going to be focusing a little bit on our school tour program and our little Acorns program, and a little bit of a shift from some of the previous panelists that we've heard and talk about having volunteers who help implement our programs themselves. Go to the next slide. So this is going to be a poll. Have you ever had volunteers interested in engaging with your youth, and you've struggled to figure out the best way to involve them? It's kind of easy to figure out how to get volunteers involved with our garden maintenance, and maybe less so if they're more interested in working with your actual programs. Give you all a minute to answer it. It looks like overwhelmingly, yes, it is a struggle. So hopefully this will help you work through that a little bit. And we can go to our next slide, where we'll dive into our school tours at the garden. Our school tours are an hour-long walkthrough of the Botanical Garden. We focus a lot on ecology and the natural environments around the world, and we're lucky to have a lot of different exhibit gardens to help us do that. While we do school tours all year long, our peak season is in the springtime, really late March through the beginning of May, before school starts to let out. Last spring alone, we had over 1,100 students across the greater New Orleans area come into the garden, and we take up to 80 students every hour. And with being a pretty small public garden with a small staff, this is only made possible through the help of volunteer tour guides leading our groups. Next. So in terms of managing our volunteer tour guides, we start with recruitment, and whereas during a bigger volunteer workday or even just a regular day in the garden, you might have people coming in with different skills. For our volunteer tour guides, we're really looking for a specific skill set, and especially volunteers who are going to be comfortable around kids. And we target mostly retired educators, and then on the other end of the spectrum, current or recent graduate students who have studied biology, ecology, or education. We're lucky in New Orleans to have a lot of universities around us to help us do that. And then the training process is really sort of key to onboarding our volunteers. We start with a one-on-one training where I walk our new volunteers through the garden and take them on a tour. And then there's a pretty extensive shadow period that we do where our new volunteers will be shadowing myself, our education director, or other volunteers along with school tours for quite a while before they lead any of their own tours. And then lastly, we do a lot of check-ins. So we're doing continuous feedback at the end of tours, just kind of checking in and chatting with our tour guides to see how it went. We do a lot of different group meetings throughout the year where we can distribute new materials, but also get feedback. And finally, we'll do our own evaluations from our staff and also teacher evaluations. So at the end of a school tour, I send out a teacher evaluation form to every school that's come through the garden and seek some feedback on the guides and then communicate that with the guides. Next slide. Because it's such a lengthy training process and so much time is involved in getting these volunteers onboarded, we really want to retain these volunteers for as long as possible. And some of the keys for retention are first going to be communication. We send out our school tour schedule weekly on the same day, pretty much at the same time every week. And as I mentioned before, we have the regular volunteer meetings to review materials and discuss any feedback. I think that clear organization is really, really important. We have a very systematic way of scheduling our volunteers, and if you look over on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see this is exactly how I send out our list of school tours in an email to our guides every week, and it's a very simple, succinct way to get all the information that they need directly to them. And it's color-coded, so when things are highlighted in yellow, it means we still are looking for more guides. The orange are going to be new volunteers who are shadowing. And once we highlight it green, it means that that tour is fully staffed. So sometimes in the springtime, I'm sending out a list 15 to 25 school tours long. And this is a way to make our guides, or to let our guides look very easily through it and see quickly where the holes are needed to be filled. And then lastly, we have what I like to call structured flexibility built into it, which means that, our flexibility is really inherent in how we lead the program with our volunteers. So our school tours are scheduled on set days and times, but volunteers sign up for tours when their schedule permits. And this is really nice because I have some volunteers who can only work earlier in the week or later in the week. I have some volunteers who prefer certain age groups. They prefer to lead tours with younger grades or older grades. And it also encourages them to have other activities involved and not lock into a firm commitment with us. And I think that that is a huge element of what keeps our school tour volunteers around for so long. And one of the nice benefits of having volunteers implement your programs is that they begin to take ownership over the programs themselves, which leads us to our next slide. Little Acorns is another program that we run at the Garden. It's run exclusively by 2 volunteers who used to be school tour guides, and it meets once a month. It is for children ages 18 months to 4 years old, and it's a story time with a garden or craft activity and a healthy snack. Next slide. Because these 2 volunteers are kind of rock stars, it makes our life pretty easy. But again, communication is really key in terms of managing this program. I have a shared Google Doc with these 2 volunteers where they put up their lesson plans for the monthly class, and I can review them and sign off on them. And kind of a big element of having your volunteers implement programs for you is, I think, taking care of all of the logistical issues and coordination ahead of time and after the program itself. So we coordinate the setup, the communication to the parents, all of the data tracking. I'm present to welcome parents and kids into the garden and to provide directions if needed. And so I try to create a situation where the only thing the volunteers have to worry about is actually leading the program itself. Next slide. So if I could identify some key elements for success, I would say that you need to, if you're thinking about having volunteers implement your programs, design those programs with intentionality and think about not just the program itself that you're going to have the volunteers lead, but the systems for how you're going to implement that and how you're going to schedule your volunteers and how you're going to communicate with your volunteers. You want to be as organized as possible, and again, like I said, make the lives of your volunteers easier so that they want to keep coming back. Communication is key to that. And lastly, just to echo some of our other panelists, it's always great to value your volunteers, even a simple thank you at the end of a school tour. And then through those regular meetings, we'll host lunches and holiday parties just to show our appreciation for all the hard work that they do, because it wouldn't be possible without them. And the next slide, just going to allow for some time for some questions. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn over to Willa for this little summary here.
All right, I'm not going to read all of this so that we have time to have questions, but in summary, a lot of what we've talked about has to do with planning, communication, coordination, and making sure that you're letting your volunteers know how much they matter to you, and y'all can read the rest. All right, Sam, I think we can go on to the next slide.
Okay, great. This is Tristana, and I'm going to ask y'all some questions. Be sure, presenters, to unmute yourselves when you'd like to respond. I'm going to start with the first one. Issues getting volunteers to take produce home. They come on weekends and water and weed, which is awesome, but often the plants continue, the produce goes to waste. Do you guys have this problem? And if you don't, even if you don't, do you have any ideas of ways to get volunteers to take food home? And I'll let all of you kind of chime in on if you'd like.
I'll start with that. So a big selling point for our Shared Roots program is that the community members have the opportunity to take produce home. I think that part of that is showing them what to do with the produce, how to use it so that they're more likely to take it home. And I know Hillary and the Capillary Food Bank do a really good job around education and showing people how to prepare and cook and how to use those items. So I'm sure she has some more to add about that.
Yes, well, it's funny because I work at a food bank, so nobody's taking anything home because we're getting that food out to people who need it in my situation. I will say that I use food a lot to educate both volunteers but also the staff. So we do cooking classes. We'll, harvest right in the garden. We'll harvest, and I'll set up a cooking spot, and we'll make kale salad. We'll rub it down, or perhaps we'll, kohlrabies is a great example that I always tell because nobody knows what a kohlrabi is or how to cook it, right? Yet we get it into the food bank. So we will sort of show people how to care for it, how to prepare it, and then we'll taste it. And I think eating in the garden is key to getting people excited about the vegetables.
Great. Well, I'll go on to the next question. Sam, this is particular for you. People were very curious about your program, the Shared Roots program. And so I'll kind of start with this one, and we can dive into some others later if we have time. Is it challenging for the community members to end their gardening at the school in the fall? And I think that could probably be relatable to anyone that's kind of working with the community garden situation where people are kind of transitioning through.
Yeah, that's a great question. My short answer is I don't know because we don't ask. I think that one thing I will say though that's interesting is that, and I don't know if the other panelists feel this way, but we open up our registration for our volunteers in the winter. We open it up in February. People are very excited to garden in February. They have an idealistic vision of the summertime and this magical free time that they'll have. And so it's great because we get a lot of folks signing up. But then come summer, we had a lot of folks that registered that were no longer interested. And then once they do start gardening with the schools, those that do get through the summer, and we do require that they attend weekly, at least once a week. I'm sure it is very difficult for them to leave, but we are encouraging them to, if possible, stay beyond the summertime. My personal vision is something similar to what Denver is doing. I'm sure other jurisdictions where instead of school gardens, they have community school gardens where the community and the school are using a shared space. I think that there's a lot of benefits to that, and I hope that we can find ways to allow community members to continue gardening beyond the time. It's really up to the school, whatever they decide is what, if they decide that the community member can stay, then they can stay.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Appreciate that. So we got a couple questions about weather, and for the person, Aaron, who asked about specifically weather in gardening in the long winters and more northern climates, I do want to make a plug. We are having a webinar on October 8th that will be all about what to do gardening specifically in more northern climates, so definitely check that out. But, for you all, could you all speak to just any suggestions for how to deal with weather, maybe how to deal with a rainy day, what's a good way to kind of transition and still work with volunteers if you have a rainy day, or, even how do you manage volunteers in the more winter months?
I'm happy to speak to that a little bit. Definitely when we're planning on having a early in the spring work day or a later in the fall work day, we always try to have some sort of hot beverage for people to drink, and remind people before the work day that it might be cold. We're still going to have the work day if it's cold, but we'll have lots of tasks that will keep them warm, like moving mulch. And then finally, if it does rain when you're expecting to be outside doing something that needs there to be dry weather, trying if at all possible to have some sort of indoor space where painting could happen or people can take a break if it's really miserable outside.
Yeah, I also will shorten my volunteer shift. I'll still have it usually, but especially in the winter, we might make it an hour and a half instead of 3 hours, just because it's not that comfortable. And it's the same in the summer. Once it's over 93, I start watching really carefully because I actually have had people have a heat stroke in the garden, and so I'm just really concerned about how hot it is. So I'll shut it down for safety reasons.
Great, thank you. I did just get a bunch of questions wondering how to sign up for that October 8th webinar. We are putting that together as we speak, and it should be up on the SGSO-Network website, SGSO-Network.org. And then if you are a part of the network, you'll also get an invite to join. So that's how you can sign up for that. What are y'all's favorite wrap-up questions? Wrapping up, for bringing people together into a circle. What are your favorite wrap-up or reflection questions, especially for more adult volunteers?
Oh, sorry, I'm right here. So I usually go around and I first just say thank you like 1,000 times in 1,000 ways, because that's the most important thing, is making sure that they feel appreciated. But I also will say, what was your favorite thing? What was, did anything surprise you in the garden? And then I'll say stuff like, well, what's your favorite vegetable? But I'll say that throughout the whole work experience as a way of connecting with people. Even at the beginning, if we need an icebreaker kind of thing, I'll say, let's go around and say our name and our favorite vegetable. But we can do that at the end too.
This isn't a question, but one of the things that we like to do is end with ways that people can either come back and see their work as it progresses over the season, or another way that they can get involved with City Blossom, so that if this was something they enjoyed, they can come join us again.
In my situation with our volunteers who lead school tours, which might be a little bit different, I always ask our volunteers at the end if they got any good questions from the kids. We find that our students coming to the gardens ask some of our best questions and get us thinking about things that we didn't even think to cover during the course of the program. So that is a huge asset to us, which is, playing off of the feedback we get from the kids themselves.
Great, thank you. Dove, I believe this question is for you. How do you find the retired educators that support your program?
How do we find them? That was the question?
Yes, how do you find them?
Well, I think that we have a little bit of good luck in that we are a well-known entity around the city, being the New Orleans Botanical Garden. So a lot of the times people find us, which is very nice. However, we also have information posted on, for our state, there's a Louisiana Retired Teachers Association. I would imagine that such an association exists elsewhere, although I'm not totally sure. So we have they have a whole volunteer posting page, and that gets us some hits sometimes as well, which is really nice. And then also reaching out to different volunteer organizations around the city, like, for example, the Louisiana Master Gardeners. We'll reach out to them and ask if there's anybody in the group who used to be a teacher. And that has also yielded a lot of great results for us.
Great, thank you. Willa, this one I think might be most applicable to you, but y'all can also jump in. The rest of you can jump in. A lot of these tips were fantastic today, specific to one garden, but do you have tips for how to manage multiple volunteer events and multiple volunteer kind of opportunities at multiple school gardens? If you're an entity that supports multiple school gardens, any tips on how to, manage community engagement?
Multiple events at the same time, or multiple volunteers over time?
More of when you're working with more than one garden, multiple school gardens, just anything in relation to that, in relation to volunteers, community engagement. Maybe how does City Blossoms manage, all of their school gardens?
Got it. One thing that we found really helpful is having sort of different people be responsible for different sites, so that volunteers, educators, people at the school know that there's one or two particular people that they're in contact with who really have a wealth of information on that site. In terms of making sure that we're managing all these different people, we try to have a sign-in table at all of our events and know that people leave with contact information, so that if they're interested in it later on or they want to stay connected with a particular site, they sort of know how to get in contact with us. Oh, and we always have a calendar posted on our website where we have all of our volunteer opportunities up so that people know how they can be involved.
Great, thank you so much. That was awesome. I know that was kind of a large question. Do y'all have any, this is kind of for all of you, do you have any guidelines around charging fees for volunteering? Maybe if you have a large corporation or a large business?
Yes. I will say that it requires a lot of effort on all of our parts to organize big work days or even single days like I do for corporate groups. They're there to serve the community, and so we charge them. And they're usually really, really happy. I mean, I've never had them complain. In fact, some of them you'll say, oh, well, we charge $500 to cover our supplies and our staff time to organize this, and they'll send a check for $1,000. So, they're corporate citizens. And then also that part of that's making sure that we're connecting with the right kind of corporate folks who have the right sort of compatible mission with that.
Yeah, we follow a very similar structure too, and that we need, our extra effort to be covered. So either giving in-kind gifts of materials that will be used at the workday, or actually giving us money so that we have the money to do all of the things that entail keeping 80 people busy.
Great. And what about, we'll finish with this question. What about chickens? Do any of you all have chickens in your garden? And do you have any particular experiences with managing volunteers and chickens? You all are smiling.
I love chickens so much. That just makes me smile. We have we have a chicken in schools program, and my role in that is making sure that schools are doing everything they're supposed to be doing in order for them to receive a permit to have chickens. But I don't have a whole lot to say around managing volunteers. I am a parent at a school with chickens, and last year my job was to clean the hen house out every once in a while, clean out all the straw, and that was a glorious job that I got to do every once in a while. But it's definitely an opportunity. There's a group of, I think that chickens are the same for adults as kids. You're going to have parents who don't want anything to do with the garden are not interested, but as soon as you get a chicken in there, they're all about it. Same with kids, they bring in new people, new kids, new interests. So it's just one way to just expand your horizon.
Great. Any other thoughts on chickens before we wrap up? Doesn't seem like it. Cool.
But it's not permissible to me.
Yeah, totally understand. Well, with that, we will wrap up. Thank you, Hillary, Willa, Sam, and Dove. That was just incredibly informative and organized and just a lovely presentation on how to engage your volunteers. So thank you so much for sharing. If anybody asked a question that we didn't get to, we will be following up with you afterwards. I know there were kind of more very programmatic specific questions. But otherwise, thank you all so much for joining. Again, you will receive a copy of the recording, and we do have a survey at the end, and if you could fill that out, that would be fantastic. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.